Take a deep breath and join me as we journey into the past where each tale unfolds with the richness of lives lived, transporting us to another era entirely. The air is thin here high in the Alps, and the morning mist clings to your skin like the inside of a damp wool sock. You wake beneath a thick blanket that smells faintly of goat smoke and oddly cheese. Outside the rough timber hut, a thin plume of smoke curls into the sky, and a small herd of goats regards you with judgmental eyes. A bell clangs somewhere off in the distance, summoning laborers, or maybe warning about bears, depending on who's in charge today. You've arrived at the very beginning of your 1000 AD journey, and yes, you probably won't survive this century if you're not a peasant, a priest, or already dead of exposure. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And post your location and local time. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Wherever you are, I hope tonight brings you rest, comfort, and maybe a curious dream or two. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle through the low doorway of the shepherd's home and step into a world mostly powered by muscle and superstition. It's 1000 AD in the Alps. The feudal web of Europe is just beginning to tighten its threads. You're technically in the Holy Roman Empire, but try explaining that to the local farmer whose world ends at the next ridge. The emperor is Otto III, a man obsessed with Rome, despite living in a realm mostly made of woodstone and cold feet. You take your first step outside onto uneven stones worn by weather and wandering livestock. The ground crunches underfoot, frosted blades of grass still stiff from the morning's chill. Your breath makes soft clouds. The goats trail you for a bit. They think you have bread. You do not. A nearby village clings to the mountainside like lichen. It consists of maybe 12 families, one angry miller, and an elderly woman who speaks to spirits in the smokehouse. She may or may not be the doctor. You don't ask. The houses are wooden, built without nails, just timber fitted and wedged and lashed together with the stubbornness of people who don't expect help from the outside. Life here is short and blisters are eternal. Breakfast is a dense, sour bread baked on stone and eaten with a smear of melted goat cheese. You are grateful, if not exactly full. The fire's banked with ashes to preserve heat from the night, and you join the family around it, listening to the eldest recite tales passed down through mouths, not manuscripts. In one story, a dragon lives in a cave above the glacier. In another, a knight from far-off lands came and gave the village a bell, but only in exchange for a toe. You try not to ask whose. The cows wear bells not for style, but for location tracking. They'll wander. Everything wanders here, including your thoughts, which drift toward the jagged peaks above. Somewhere up there is a stone pass used by traders, monks, and the occasional fugitive noble. Historians still argue whether it was Alpine villagers or Lombard travelers who first established the winding trails that would later become vital trade arteries. Either way, your calves ache just thinking about the incline. Later in the day, you accompany a shaggy bearded man to a tiny chapel carved partially from the mountainside. It is barely big enough for 10 people, but its rough-hewn altar glows in candlelight. The priest, who may also be a blacksmith, blesses a sick child with a relic said to be a splinter from the true cross. You squint, wondering if it might just be a very old pine chip. Still, the gesture is sincere. Outside, women stir vats of herbal concoctions, drying leaves and bark for medicine. There's no pharmacy. You just hope the healer knows the difference between belladonna and sage. Local knowledge is everything, and even now someone is carving an astrological diagram into a goat skull, just in case. Fringe belief or early science, sometimes it's the same thing. You hike up a nearby ridge at midday and see farther than you ever thought possible. Below lies the patchwork of the alpine world green valleys, distant cloisters, switchback roads scratched into cliff sides like threads of ambition. You share a moment with a shepherd boy who offers you a smoked sausage that tastes like dried wind. He shows you a piece of bone carved with runes. It's his good luck charm. He doesn't know it used to be part of a bishop's femur. Recycling is a thing. On your descent, a woman in a wool shawl invites you to a wedding feast. There's laughter, song, and barley beer that could be used as paint stripper. The meat is salted. The guests are generous, and someone pulls out a stringed instrument, probably a rebec, and starts up a tune that's been played in one form or another for centuries. You sway, foot tapping and dazed, warmed by firelight, and the sheer stubborn joy of people making do. That night, you return to the smoky hut. The goats are back inside snoring. The wind howls past the wooden slats, but inside it's almost cozy. You curl beneath the same wool blanket, now less strange. Smoke clings to your hair. Your legs hurt. You've survived your first day in 1000 AD Europe. Only 20 more countries to go. You wake to the sound of a rooster who seems to think it's already midday. Your limbs are stiff, your nose is cold, and somewhere in your hair is a breadcrumb from last night's barley loaf. But there's no time to complain. You've got to cross into the heart of the Holy Roman Empire. Specifically to Aachen. The air gets thicker as you descend from the Alps, and the language shifts subtly with every village. You pass a series of winding paths, muddy fields, and scattered travelers, merchants with wagons, monks with sandals, and one suspicious man carrying a tax ledger and looking very smug. The roads here aren't paved unless they're Roman leftovers, and most of the time you're walking on churned up earth. Still, the terrain evens out eventually, and after days of trudging, you arrive at Aachen, Charlemagne's city. It's not quite as grand as it sounds. There's no Eiffel Tower or glittering skyline. But the place does carry a kind of reverent weight. You feel it in the stones. The cathedral dominates the horizon like a dark crown. It's built in octagonal layers with heavy arching vaults and shadowed corners that whisper of incense and power. You step inside and your breath catches. Gold mosaics glitter on the ceiling. Marble columns rise around you. And there, under a gilded chandelier the size of a modest ship, is the throne of Charlemagne himself. Now, yes, it's basically a block of stone. And yes, it looks wildly uncomfortable, but it's his. Charlemagne, who died almost 2 centuries ago, still hovers over Europe like a paternal ghost with a big sword and a larger ego. Otto III, the current emperor, is absolutely obsessed with him. He even opened Charlemagne's tomb once, probably to check if the old man was still wearing his crown. Spoiler, he was. You wander through Aachen's halls and are struck by how seriously people take the past, even when their present is made of wooden carts and recurring plagues. Pilgrims kneel beside relics, a piece of the Virgin Mary's robe, some saintly hair, even allegedly a bit of Christ's swaddling cloth. You try not to ask how any of this was preserved before refrigeration. Out in the courtyard, a group of boys are training with wooden swords. Their instructor wears chainmail and a look of permanent disapproval. "Hit like you mean it," he barks. You back away slowly before he hands you a stick. A local merchant sees your hesitation and laughs. He offers you a handful of candied nuts wrapped in linen. He tells you stories about traders from the low countries of silver coming from the Harz Mountains, and of a monk who swears he saw a 2-headed goat last week. You believe him. At least about the nuts, they're delicious if a little gritty. Later you visit the Palskapelle, the palace chapel where emperors are crowned. It's somber echoing and smells vaguely like damp limestone. You shuffle quietly with other visitors watching as clergy in ornate robes perform rites in Latin you don't understand. You catch the word imperator and pretend to nod sagely. Outside, children chase a pig through the market. It's unclear whether it's part of a game or a butcher's delivery gone wrong. Either way, you cheer them on. Markets in Aachen are lively affairs. Cloth from Flanders, salt from the Baltic wax candles, brass trinkets, and a suspiciously strong perfume made from goose fat and lavender. You buy none of it. You do, however, spot a man selling painted wooden figures, knights, saints, emperors. One looks suspiciously like Otto the Third, but with a better jawline. The man insists it brings luck. You're not convinced, especially when a passing monk mutters something about idolatry and throws it in a bucket. As the sun dips low, the cathedral bells toll. The sound rolls across the city like slow thunder. You find a quiet bench under a fig tree which is absolutely struggling in this climate, and listen to the layered hum of evening horses clopping on cobblestones, faint prayers from inside the chapel, and the distinct rhythm of a cooper hammering out a barrel nearby. One of the monks joins you on the bench, wiping his hands with a bit of cloth-stained blue from manuscript ink. He tells you about the scriptorium where they copy not just holy texts, but classical ones too. Plato, Aristotle, even some dusty Roman engineer who liked aqueducts more than people. The monk confides that sometimes they sneak in jokes, tiny cartoons in the margins. Historians still argue whether those drawings were meant as protest or boredom, he chuckles. You like this monk. The day ends with a modest meal in the refectory bean stew, black bread and a bit of cheese that smells deeply philosophical. You eat slowly, surrounded by candlelight and murmured conversation. One young novice recites verses from a psalter in Latin, his voice wavering, eyes fixed on the parchment. He's probably 12. You're unsure whether to be impressed or concerned. That night, you sleep in a room above a stable wrapped in a borrowed wool cloak and lulled by the breathing of horses below. Aachen is quieter than you expected. Grand, yes, but grounded. Charlemagne may be long gone, but his ghost still tugs at the corners of things. You fall asleep thinking about that throne. Stone, sharp-edged, unyielding. Much like the Empire, it still rules even in death. By the time you leave Aachen, the sun is just beginning to stir. You trudge eastward first, then south, following a caravan of traders down toward the boot-shaped land, where marshes, mosaics, and mozzarella all mingle under the occasional imperial edict. Your feet ache. Your pack smells like wool and garlic. But eventually, after days of narrow forest paths, boggy roads, and one terrifying moment involving an overly enthusiastic ox, you reach a shimmer of light on water. Venice. Except it's not quite the romantic postcard you might be imagining. In 1000 AD, Venice is still in the middle of deciding whether it's a city, a marketplace, or a half-submerged miracle clinging to life by sheer willpower and boat glue. The first thing you notice is the sound clinking bells from distant churches traders, shouting in at least 4 languages, and the rhythmic slap of water against buildings that shouldn't technically be standing. The second thing you notice is the smell. It's not bad necessarily, it's just busy. Fish, salt, candle wax, and something that might be fermented cabbage swirl through the air. You step onto a stone path barely a meter above the canal where wooden bridges stretch like crooked spines from one island to the next. Everything seems to float, including you. Venetians in 1000 AD are thriving, not because they've got great plumbing, they absolutely don't, but because they have figured out how to trade with everyone and insult no one. They walk a tightrope between East and West, nodding politely to Byzantines, Arabs, and Frankish lords while selling them salt glassware and the occasional luxurious Byzantine-inspired slipper. You pass merchants weighing silk on tiny brass scales, arguing whether a bolt came from Constantinople or Alexandria. A boy in a wool tunic runs past you clutching a scroll. Behind him, a scribe shouts threats in a mixture of Latin and Old Venetian. You duck into a side alley to avoid them and emerge beside the harbor. Here, massive boats bob like waiting giants. Ships with square sails and names painted in faded red glide through the lagoon. Dock workers shout back and forth, hoisting crates with pulley systems that creak ominously. One crate spills, revealing bright blue pigments and a very distressed chicken. You wander into a quieter area, a shaded courtyard where monks sit beneath olive trees hunched over low tables. This is the scriptorium, and it's where texts are copied with the kind of care usually reserved for saints or particularly good cheese. One monk invites you to sit. He has ink-stained fingers and a face that suggests he's seen 3 popes and hated all of them. You watch him work. The manuscript is in Latin, but the margins are filled with little creatures: rabbits with swords, monks riding fish, a woman smacking a devil with a slipper. He winks at you. "Keeps me sane," he mutters. You nod, pretending you weren't just startled by a marginal pig playing a harp. Nearby, another scribe is translating a bit of Greek philosophy. He complains that Aristotle didn't believe in Venetian wine, which is clearly a flaw. The monks argue lightly and lazily about everything from the nature of God to whether cats are demons or just misunderstood. You do not offer your opinion. There is a cat sitting right behind you. Lunch is simple boiled lentils, some crusty bread, and a slice of cheese that probably knew Charlemagne personally. You're offered wine which tastes like someone whispered grapes into a barrel and then forgot about it. Still, it's better than the canal water. Significantly. In the late afternoon, you explore the Rialto market. It isn't the grand stone structure it will later become, but it's already bustling meat, fish, spices, parchment, glass, even a man trying to sell dried frog legs as love charms. One woman shows you a vial of rosewater perfume and insists it cures heartbreak, lice, and theological doubt. Historians still argue whether Venice's strength in this era came from its naval innovation or its diplomacy. You begin to suspect it was simply their ability to sell anything to anyone while keeping their shoes dry. You pass a glassblower shop where heat roars from a clay furnace. The man inside shapes molten glass into something that looks like a flower, and then for no reason turns it into a tiny goblet. He offers it to you, but you politely decline. It's beautiful and wildly impractical for traveling through muddy roads and Byzantine politics. As evening falls, you hear the bells of San Marco echoing across the water. The basilica is being rebuilt after a fire, and scaffolding now hugs its sides. Still even unfinished, the place glows with gold and mosaic. You enter and your eyes are assaulted in the best way by the sparkle of tesserae shimmering icons and flickering candlelight. A choir sings in Greek. The incense burns your nose and clears your soul simultaneously. In the shadow of saints and sea salt, you sit for a while letting your thoughts float like driftwood. Venice is still young, still experimenting. But even now you can feel the shape of something enormous beneath it. An empire of trade, of shimmer, of subtle ambition dressed in silk. A boatman offers you a ride across the Grand Canal in a flat-bottomed gondola, not the elegant black lacquered thing of later centuries, but more of a wooden canoe with dreams. You climb aboard and the boat rocks gently beneath your feet. The water laps. The sky is a velvet sheet pricked with stars, and the city reflects it all back in candlelight. You dock near a small inn where ducks waddle across the steps like they own the place. Inside, you find a room barely wider than your outstretched arms. You lie down on straw-stuffed bedding and listen as the canals gurgle outside your shuttered window. You're in Venice. You didn't fall into the water. You might even smell better than when you arrived. It's a win. The next morning, your boots squelch a little as you step off the boat and onto dry land, relatively dry at least. You wave goodbye to the gondolier who grunts in response and rows off into the morning fog. Ahead of you stretches the road to Bologna, a city not yet famous but already quietly important, in a way that most people won't appreciate for another century. The journey inland is gentle passing through low wetlands that give way to fields and then eventually to vineyards and squat villas where dogs bark and donkeys roll their eyes. You pass pilgrims, a few merchants, and one man dragging an entire cart of cabbages while singing loudly about Saint Benedict's digestive miracles. You decide not to interrupt. Bologna comes into view with a kind of quiet confidence. It doesn't gleam or glitter. It doesn't even smell particularly interesting. But there's something in the air here, a sharpness like the city knows something you don't. You follow the curved walls inward through a gate half blocked by a sleepy guard and a goat with personal space issues. Inside, it's narrow alleys and reddish walls, shadowed porticos where conversations bloom and vanish like smoke. Unlike Venice, there's no water lapping at your ankles, and unlike Aachen, there are no emperors posturing from stone thrones. What Bologna has instead is law. You walk into a small building tucked behind a larger chapel. It smells like parchment dust and anxiety. This is an early law school, more of a reading room, really, but it will one day be known as the place where European legal thought is reborn. Right now, it's just a bunch of men arguing about Justinian and dropping ink on their robes. One young man, barely older than a teenager, waves you over to a table. He has the tired eyes of someone who's read too much Latin and forgotten what bread tastes like. He explains breathlessly that Bologna is where Roman law is being rediscovered. Not made up rediscovered as if it had been hiding under a bed this whole time. They call it Corpus Juris Civilis. You nod sagely, even though it sounds like a rash. He shows you a page filled with dense, cramped writing, and even tinier notes in the margins. One line says, Nisi bonus pater familias, which he translates as, unless you're a reasonably decent family man. It's hard to tell if he's joking. In the corner of the room, a professor with a beard that could support a nest begins a lecture. His voice echoes off the stone walls. He's quoting Ulpian, a Roman jurist, with the kind of dramatic flair usually reserved for theater troupes and public floggings. You sit in the back, scribbling in your own notes, which are just doodles of angry scrolls and a sad goat. Historians still argue whether Bologna's legal revival was spontaneous or planned. One student whispers beside you. Personally, I think someone just got really excited about footnotes. After class, the students spill into the nearby square to debate contract theory, the morality of usury, and which bakery sells the least stale focaccia. You tag along, only half following, until a girl in a linen tunic offers you a sliver of almond cake and a half-hearted explanation of inheritance laws. Later that day, you pass a small courtroom where a trial is in session. The defendant, a man with permanently furrowed brows, is accused of stealing 2 sheep and a wheelbarrow from his neighbor. There are no wigs, no gavels, no angry outbursts. Just a judge with a feathered hat and 3 pages of legal commentary. After much debate, it's ruled that he can keep 1 sheep if he apologizes in rhyme. He does. It's awkward. You wander out into the wider city down a street where ink makers shout about their dyes, and one extremely confident woman sells wax tablets shaped like saints' pigs or both. You buy a small one shaped like St. Catherine. It melts almost immediately. At a local inn, you share a table with a group of scribes who are copying text by candlelight while eating stew. They argue about whether the Book of Leviticus is a legal text, a religious guide, or the world's earliest attempt at micromanagement. You ask a question and instantly regret it. 3 hours later, you know more about tithing purity codes and ancient foot fungus than you ever wanted. You leave quietly and find yourself in a square filled with voices. Not shouting, not preaching, just talking. Talking about rules, fairness, oaths, and why it's never smart to lend your ox to a cousin without documentation. There's something strange and lovely about it. In a world where most places still settle dispute with sharp objects and louder voices, Bologna is trying something different. It's experimenting with paper and persuasion. It's building a city not on gold or glory, but on scrolls, scribbles, and ideas. That evening, you climb one of the tall towers that dot the city skyline like broken chimneys. The wind buffets your cloak. The view is modest, not majestic terracotta roofs, flickering lanterns, the hum of late-night debate drifting upward from every window. Bologna isn't trying to impress you. It doesn't need to. It's too busy reading. You descend as the stars emerge, shoes scuffed, mind oddly buzzing with half-remembered Latin phrases and obscure rules about dowries. You sleep in a modest guest house owned by a woman who charges you 1 coin and a compliment on her bread. You offer both. As you drift off, you realize you didn't see a single sword today. Just parchment pens and people trying very hard to understand each other. It might be the most radical thing you've seen so far. You leave Bologna under a rising sun, trailing dust and crumbs from last night's barley cake in your cloak folds. South and west you go, and then north again, because roads in 1000 AD don't believe in straight lines. Eventually, you cross into the soft hills and river valleys of Burgundy, a region that sounds like wine and poetry, but mostly smells like horses' damp cloaks and sometimes oddly pears. Here, feudalism is in full bloom. Lords rule pockets of land like moody landlords with oversized keys. Peasants bend their backs in muddy fields. And you, well, you mostly try to stay out of the way. Because everyone in Burgundy seems to be arguing about boundaries, tithes, or whether that last pig was technically stolen or just borrowed for winter. The landscape is undeniably pretty, though. Rolling fields patched together with dry stone walls. Oak forests where boars root around and squirrels drop acorns on your head with unsettling accuracy. You arrive in a village marked by a crooked wooden sign and a chicken who definitely thinks she's in charge. No one corrects her. The local manor house sits on a gentle rise surrounded by a wooden palisade and 3 suspiciously aggressive geese. Inside, a minor lord greets you with the practiced generosity of someone who might ask for a favor later. He wears a tunic that was probably once blue and offers you a goblet of weak wine and a fire-warmed stool. His name is Robert, or possibly Raymond. He changes it depending on whom he's trying to impress. You're invited to observe court business that afternoon. It takes place in a drafty hall that doubles as a granary and smells like apples and hay. Villagers present their complaints to the Lord. Grazing disputes a missing spindle one man who insists his neighbor's sheep are insulting him on purpose. Robert Chacky Raymond listens, strokes his beard, and occasionally declares something unseemly. You're not entirely sure what that means, but it seems effective. Later, his steward gives you a quiet tour. You're shown the granaries, the forge, the very modest chapel, and the single scroll containing the local tax records. It's stored in a wooden chest next to 3 onions and a rock someone mistook for a relic. The steward says it's been a good year, only 2 uprisings and 1 false saint. Down in the village, life ticks on in simple rhythms. Women spin flax on doorsteps, men tend fires, and children chase ducks with astonishing determination. The houses are low-daubed with wattle and mud, and the roofs sag like they're tired of pretending. You step into one and immediately duck bonking your head on a ceiling beam that has likely humbled generations before you. The family inside welcomes you with nods and a stew made of things you don't entirely recognize. Roots beans, maybe a turnip's cousin. They offer you the best seat by the fire and a bit of gossip. Apparently, the miller's son has been sneaking off at night to meet a girl from across the stream who may or may not be a forest spirit, or a merchant's daughter. Either way, scandalous. A priest stops by near dusk. He's old, cheerful, and missing two fingers. You don't ask. He blesses the stew, the family, and somewhat oddly, your boots. Then he talks about the monastery up the hill. It's Benedictine, quiet, orderly, and has recently acquired a relic said to be the toe of Saint Apollonia. Great for toothaches, he says, smiling with only 4 teeth. You hike up to the monastery the next morning. The path winds through chestnut trees and sudden patches of thistle. The abbey itself is peaceful, built from pale stone, and surrounded by gardens that smell of mint and lavender. Inside, monks chant in soft rhythms, their voices bouncing gently from arch to arch. You join their morning prayers, or at least pretend to mouthing sounds that are definitely not Latin. Afterwards, one monk gives you a tour. He tells you how Burgundy is becoming a spiritual hub. Cluny Abbey, not far from here, is reforming monastic life, emphasizing simplicity, devotion, and architectural symmetry. Historians still argue whether this movement was driven by piety or just a clever way to avoid taxes. Either way, you admire the cloister's clean lines and the way the sun filters through narrow windows, dust dancing like tiny blessings. Back in the village, a small fair has appeared overnight. Not grand, just a few stalls, a juggler who drops things often, and a man selling wooden spoons carved with questionable saints. A local woman offers you a ride on her mule. You politely decline. She shrugs and takes the juggler instead. Children gather for a puppet show performed by a man whose puppets include a talking chicken, a foolish knight, and a suspiciously wise cabbage. The show ends with a moral, "Don't steal turnips" from someone with a longer spear. Applause follows. The chicken puppet gets the loudest cheers. By nightfall, the whole village is sitting around bonfires. Someone plays a lute badly. Someone else tells a story about a spirit in the well who demands compliments. The wine flows. It's not good, but it's generous. You sit on a log wrapped in a borrowed cloak, listening as the stars flicker above like candle drips on the ceiling of the world. Burgundy isn't rich. It's not mighty, but it knows how to make life livable. Between the squabbles and saints, the petty lords and poetic lies, there's a quiet diplomacy at play, keeping things together, even when nothing makes sense. And tonight it makes enough sense to sleep. The next day finds you nursing a mild headache, a bruised knee from an enthusiastic farewell hug from a mule, and the slightly stale remains of a barley cake tucked into your satchel. You turn north toward the River Seine, passing through hedged lanes and rain-glossed fields until, finally, you feel it in the air, Paris. Not the city of lights, not yet. More like the city of smells, some ecclesiastical, some distinctly fishy, and a few that remain mercifully unidentifiable. It's 1000 AD in Paris, and the future capital of fashion and revolution is at the moment a growing but awkward teenager of a city. The Seine divides it just as it always will, but the bridges are mostly made of wood and optimism. You cross one cautiously, your boots thudding on soaked planks, as barges drift below heavy with fish stones and one man playing a flute very badly. Notre Dame doesn't exist yet, not in the form you know. Instead, the spiritual heart of Paris sits at the Cathedral of Saint-Étienne, a stern old stone presence where people gather to pray, argue, and occasionally nap through long services. The bishop, if you're lucky enough to glimpse him, Wears a hat that looks suspiciously like a very well-trained pastry. You wander into the cathedral during Mass. The Latin floats above your head, part chant, part echo, part acoustic confusion. You don't understand most of it, but the rhythm pulls you along, and soon you find yourself kneeling beside a woman who smells of lavender and anxiety. Her whispered prayer includes something about a husband, a pig, and divine retribution. Afterwards, you join a group of pilgrims outside who are admiring a bone fragment said to belong to Saint Denis. It's kept in a velvet-lined box and watched closely by a monk who looks like he'd definitely notice if you tried to sneeze on it. Good for headaches, someone whispers. You still have yours from last night's wine, but you don't test it. Outside the religious sanctuaries, Paris is bustling in a muddy, chaotic way. Streets are narrow, curved like the lines on a sleeping cat. You're nearly flattened by a cart carrying salted eels. You dodge a group of students reciting something about Boethius at full volume. You slip in something that was definitely once bread. Paris demands your attention. You make your way to the Ile de la Cité, the city's core. Here, markets crowd the narrow lanes, and every third stall sells onions bread or pottage, often all together. A baker offers you a taste of his new invention, a lumpy proto-baguette with the density of medieval law. You accept chew thoughtfully and try not to break a tooth. The baker tells you stories while flour dusts his beard. There's talk, he says, of expanding the Abbey School. He nods toward the left bank where clusters of students and teachers gather to debate theology and grammar. It's still informal, but the seeds of the University of Paris are already there. Young men with ink-stained fingers shouting about transubstantiation, and whose tunic smells the worst. You sit in on a lecture under a tree where a man in robes flaps dramatically about the dual natures of Christ. A squirrel interrupts by pelting acorns from above. No one seems to mind. Historians still argue whether the early Parisian schools were truly revolutionary, or just an excuse to avoid chores, someone nearby mutters. You agree silently and completely. Around midday, you find yourself in a modest tavern that smells like sweat barley and hope. You're served pottage again, a warm gruel made from beans herbs, and what you pray is not eel. A monk eats beside you, dipping stale bread with care. He tells you about the ancient Roman ruins buried beneath the city and how some say ghosts walk the baths. Ghosts in togas, he says with a wink. Very polite. After the meal, you climb the hill to Montmartre. It's mostly wind mud and distant farms now, but from here, you see the outline of the growing city. Churches, taverns, thatch roofs leaning against each other for balance and smoke, curling up in lazy strands. The towers of future grandeur are still dreams, but the bones are there. You sit beside a shepherd playing a flute. He only knows one tune and he plays it badly, but it fills the air with something soft. Children roll down the hill laughing. A girl catches your eye and proudly shows you a wooden doll with an onion for a head. You admire it sincerely. Later you descend and pass through a Jewish quarter, where scribes transcribe Torah scrolls and a few elders nod at you as you pass. A Christian monk and a Jewish scholar are deep in conversation over an open book. It's a moment you hold close, brief, respectful, and entirely unexpected. As twilight settles, you find yourself in the courtyard of a small convent. The nuns are at prayer, their voices lifting gently into the darkening sky. You sit beneath an arch and listen. The candles flicker. Someone offers you a bit of honeycomb, sticky and sweet, and it becomes the best part of your day. Night in Paris is not silent. Dogs bark. Drunks sing. A donkey brays so persistently it seems to be arguing with the moon. But your room, tiny with straw bedding and one generous mouse, is warm. You fall asleep with the taste of honey still on your tongue and the slow chant of nuns echoing in your ears. In this city of bread prayers and questionable eels, you have found something gentle. Dawn slips in like a lazy cat over the fields of northern France, and you find yourself once again marching westward, boots caked with mud, and mind still fogged with the lingering scent of that convent honeycomb. The road curves narrow splits and rejoins itself again, as if unsure whether it's leading to war or breakfast. Eventually, you come to a land of low hills, crooked rivers, and timber towers, Normandy. You're met first by a man on horseback who demands to know if you're here to trade, preach, or make trouble. When you answer mostly just walk, he shrugs and waves you through. A very Norman welcome. The Duchy of Normandy in 1000 AD is barely a century old, but already it pulses with confidence. This land was granted to Viking settlers less than 100 years ago, and their grandsons have traded longboats for chainmail pagan chants, for Latin prayers and mead for cider, strong enough to make your teeth whisper regrets. You stop at a keep under construction, a squat stone tower surrounded by scaffolding and shouting. Workers haul blocks with ropes and curse in both Norse and Old French. A foreman tells you proudly that their lord is building 3 more keeps in the region so everyone knows whose pigs are whose. You nod respectfully. Few things in Normandy cause more conflict than pigs and boundaries. A young knight in training shows you his new sword. It's blunt heavy and clearly more ceremonial than lethal. He still swings it with enough enthusiasm to make you step back twice. My grandfather raided Paris, he says with unearned pride. But I can read Latin. You congratulate him and quietly relocate to a safer spot near the stables. You pass through several Norman villages over the next few days. Timbered houses with thatched roofs lean together like gossiping aunties. Children run beside your cart shrieking about dragons and offering you apples in exchange for stories. You tell them about a talking mule in Burgundy. They're thrilled. At one inn, you sip hot cider with a band of mercenaries. One wears a bear pelt. Another insists he once saw the Pope pick his nose. They laugh too loudly, drink too deeply, and treat you like a long-lost cousin after 10 minutes. Norman hospitality once slurs draping an arm around you. We might steal your chickens, but we'll give you dinner first. By now, the Viking roots of Normandy are mostly symbolic. Still, every village has a tale or two of raiders' sea spirits, or the time someone's uncle built a ship from cursed oak. One fisherman claims he still sees Odin in the fog. You're not sure whether to believe him or his cider. You visit the port of Rouen, where ships crowd the docks like horses jostling for feed. Traders from England, Flanders, and Denmark unload goods while shouting over gulls. You spot a woman selling carved amulets. Christian crosses Thor's hammers and one that looks suspiciously like a turnip. She calls them just-in-case tokens. You buy 2. The cathedral in Rouen is already impressive, even if parts of it still resemble scaffolding more than sanctuary. You stand inside while the choir rehearses. Their voices rise like smoke through stone arches. A monk tells you proudly that one of their abbots once debated a bishop until the bishop fainted. From awe, you ask. The monk winks. From boredom. In a nearby market, you sample smoked fish, tough bread, and a mysterious pudding that may contain onions, honey, and possibly feathers. A baker offers you a warm tart, and upon learning you're a traveler, insists you try the local specialty, bouillie de pomme, or boiled apples. It's better than it sounds, slightly. That night, you sleep in a loft above a cider press. The air is thick with the smell of fermenting apples and damp wood. You dream of shipbuilders and saints, of goats wearing helmets, of a feast where everyone speaks Norse and you only understand the dessert. You wake to the rhythmic thunk-thunk of carpenters repairing a bridge. The road calls again, but before you leave, a gray-haired woman gives you a scarf dyed with walnut husks and cider lees. For luck, she says, and to hide your face if the Danes come back. You walk west toward the coast fields, opening into salty breezes and gull cries. A man passing in the opposite direction tells you that the Duke of Normandy has ambitions, big ones. Castle ships, maybe even a crown across the sea someday. Historians still argue, he says, whether Normandy was born from violence or vision. He smiles, likely both. As the sun dips low over the apple orchards and sheep-mottled hills, you rest beneath an old oak. Its trunk bears carvings, runes, and crosses side by side a timeline etched in wood. You trace one with your finger. It feels like a story still unfolding. You fall asleep to the sound of wind through leaves and a faint, lingering taste of cider on your tongue. Normandy, you think, is nothing if not persistent, and you've learned to respect places with that kind of memory. The wind from the channel is sharp enough to slice through your cloak as you cross into England by boat, if you can call it that. More a broad log with aspirations, the voyage is short, wet, and full of regrets. You sit wedged between a monk, a bale of wool, and a chicken who takes an immediate dislike to you. When your vessel bumps against the English shore, you're too cold to celebrate and too damp to complain. You wade ashore somewhere near the southern coast, just outside a small fishing village where smoke curls lazily from turf-roofed huts, and everyone squints at you like they suspect you might be a Danish spy or worse, a tax collector. Welcome to Anglo-Saxon England, circa 1000 AD. The kingdom ruled at this time by King Ethelred the Unready, whose nickname is less about personal tardiness and more about poor advice feels like it's holding its breath. Danish raids have rocked the coastline for years, and though a brief peace holds now, no one trusts it. Especially not the blacksmith who keeps a spear by the forge and glares at every longboat on the horizon. You tramp inland through wet fields, your boots sinking slightly into every step. The land is soft here, muddy green misty. Hedges burst with thorns and sheep roam like fluffy punctuation marks across the hills. Every mile or so you see a carved wooden cross or a weathered standing stone half swallowed by moss. The landscape hums with stories. You stop in a village where the houses squat low like they're bracing for something. Children run barefoot through puddles, giggling as they chase geese. A woman stirs a pot of fish stew over an open hearth and offers you a spoonful without breaking her rhythm. It tastes like mild regret and something vaguely herbal. Good for the lungs, she says. You thank her politely and pretend not to cough. At the center of the village is a hall, not grand, but warm with thick wooden beams and the smoky aroma of meat sweat and slightly overcooked poetry. Inside a scop, a bard performs to a rapt audience. His voice rises in Anglo-Saxon verse, recounting the deeds of Beowulf with just enough theatrical grunts and heroic pauses to keep even the sleepy goat interested. You sit near the fire as the hall fills with laughter cider and the clatter of wooden bowls. People here eat communally hearty stews, brown bread, pickled vegetables, and cheese that smells older than most of the livestock. It's not glamorous, but it sticks to your ribs and reminds you that survival here is a group effort. Later that evening, the reeve, a sort of village official, tells you about the land laws. Everything here is mapped by hides, not acres, and inheritance is a complex dance of family ties and landholding charters, written in scripts that require squinting and a good memory. Historians still argue, he says, poking the fire, whether the English system was orderly or just cleverly chaotic. He shrugs. It works, mostly. You walk the roads between settlements over the next few days, noting the quiet dignity of these people. They farm, they pray, they gossip. They fear Danish sails like modern people fear their inboxes. They're ruled by kings, yes, but also by customs older than any crown. In one village, you witness a moot, a local court held under a large oak tree. Disputes are aired whose cow crossed which fence, whether a tunic was fairly traded who owes whom 3 loaves and a dried fish. The elder presiding carries a staff and wears a tunic stitched with decorative runes. His judgments are brief fare and occasionally interrupted by coughing fits. Justice but rustic. You visit a monastery perched above the river, its stone walls slick with mist. Inside the scriptorium hums with scribes copying Latin texts and writing annals in Old English. A monk lets you hold a page of vellum covered in neat, dark script. We're writing the year's events, he says. Plenty of bad weather. 1 miracle. 2 pig thefts. You ask about the miracle. He shrugs. A tree that bloomed twice. Or maybe someone lied. Anglo-Saxon art decorates the chapel, a cross carved with interlacing patterns, a chalice chased in silver, a wall painting of St. Cuthbert looking both serene and mildly judgmental. You hear monks debate the date of Easter, a subject so complex it might as well involve string theory. You smile and leave them to it. One afternoon you wander into a village just in time for a marriage celebration. There's music, pipes, drums, voices lifted in songs that sound as old as the soil. The bride wears a garland of ivy and a necklace of glass beads. The groom presents her with a sword. You're not sure if it's romantic or threatening, but everyone claps. Someone hands you a bowl of mead and says, "Drink before the Danes come back." You don't argue. As you rest beneath an ash tree that evening, the land feels both ancient and raw. England in 1000 AD is a patchwork villages tied by kinship, ruled by ealdormen and kings, whispered about by poets and chroniclers. It isn't yet unified in the way modern maps suggest, but it knows itself. It carries its stories like stones in a pocket. You sleep in a shepherd's hut that night, wrapped in a spare cloak, lulled by the distant bawing of sheep and the creak of branches in the wind. A carved charm hangs over the door part. Christian cross part, older, wilder symbol. You touch it lightly. Here in Anglo-Saxon England, everything has layers, faith, language, and even the stew. You wake to rain. Not a downpour, not a storm, just that very English drizzle that seeps sideways and insists on joining you no matter what. It glazes your cloak, dampens your bread, and settles in your boots like an unwanted guest. But still you trudge on northward, up toward a land that remembers the Romans, flirts with the Norse, and cultivates turnips with serious intent. Welcome to York. The city rises before you. Slowly its stone walls softened by mist and moss. Its skyline punctuated by towers' smoke, and the occasional errant kite paper, not bird. Once called Eboracum by the Romans and Jorvik by the Vikings, York in 1000 AD is a city layered like a meat pie, spiced with memory, spattered with mud. You cross the River Ouse on a wooden bridge, slick with dew and centuries of anxious feet. Market stalls crowd the entryways, vendors calling out in a mix of Old English and Norse, hawking everything from smoked fish to amber beads, to dried apples that taste vaguely of regret. You pass a woman selling runes carved into bits of bone. She swears they can predict marriage war and stomach aches. Inside the city, it's all cobbled alleys and timber-framed houses leaning so far over the lanes they nearly shake hands. The smell is complex smoke, damp wood onions, horse sweat, and a hint of honeyed mead that you can't quite locate. Children run past playing a game that seems to involve a stick, a rag doll, and threats of exile. At the center of York is a market square where Romans once drilled in formation. Now it's home to fishmongers, potters, and a poet standing on a crate loudly reciting tales of Ragnar hairy breeches. You pause to listen. His version includes a surprisingly detailed monologue from a goose. You make your way to the old Roman fortress, or what's left of it. Stones the size of oxen still line parts of the wall. One has Latin carved into it, barely legible, but it whispers something about emperors and eternity. Nearby, a group of local priests are repurposing the ruins into the foundations of a new church. One tells you proudly, nothing holds up like Roman masonry except St. Cuthbert's patience. You nod. You don't argue with people wielding trowels and divine authority. You find a small tavern run by a woman named Elsweeth, who serves you a trencher of barley stew and roast turnips. No meat today, she says. The bishop's watching. You chew quietly. The turnips are surprisingly emotional, firm, slightly sweet, and oddly contemplative. You begin to understand why they feature so heavily in local folklore. After lunch, you walk the streets and notice inscriptions in two languages: Latin, etched in stone, Norse runes carved into wooden door frames. You spot a runestone tucked into the side of a bakery, half swallowed by ivy and generations of soot. A boy nearby tells you the stone grants good luck, but only if you compliment it. You do, quietly. The minster looms in the background, not yet the towering Gothic marvel it will become, but already a sight of reverence. Inside, monks chant. Their voices rise in soft waves, and the vaulted ceiling seems to hold the sound like a wine cup. A bishop walks past in silk robes. His shoes squeak slightly, which does diminish the majesty, but only a little. A local craftsman shows you how he makes ink using oak galls and iron salts. He stains his fingers and doesn't seem to mind. Ink outlives us all, he says, unless it rains. You ask if he writes poetry. He frowns. Only to curse taxes. Understandable. That evening, a gathering forms near the city gate. People light torches and share stories under a wide oak tree that's probably seen more history than half the lords in the kingdom. A storyteller stands forward and recites a tale of when the Danes ruled this city, of King Eric Bloodaxe, of silver hoards and ship burials beneath the cliffs. Historians still argue, he says with a twinkle, whether Eric died in battle or was just bad at politics. You sip warm ale from a wooden mug and watch the firelight flicker across eager faces. Some are weary, some scarred, all attentive. The North remembers not just the battles, but the bitter winters, the uneasy peace, the way languages wrapped around each other and never quite let go. You stay the night in a weaver's loft above her loom. The beams creak. The blankets smell faintly of sheep, and the floor tilts slightly to the left. But it's warm, and from the small window you can see the minster's silhouette rising like a promise in the night. York is neither Roman nor Viking now. Not entirely. It's something else, something cobbled together with bone charms and saints' bones, with fish pies and old songs. A place where memory isn't just preserved, it's practiced. As you drift off to sleep, you hear the wind shift. In the distance, someone plays a harp. Or possibly it's the wind whistling through broken roof tiles. Either way, it sounds like home. The sky is sullen when you leave York, as if the clouds themselves are unsure whether to rain or brood. You wrap your cloak tighter and head west, then northwest, following smaller paths that become more suggestion than road. Soon you're navigating through damp heather and sheep-tracked trails where the air smells like wet wool and something green you can't name. You're bound for the edge of the world, or so it seems. Ireland waits across the sea, cloaked in mist and legend, where saints walk the cliffs and scribes light candles against the dark. The crossing from the western coast of Britain is rough. The boat is small, the waves are not. You spend the voyage wedged between barrels of salted fish, trying not to think about your own mortality, or the smell of the monk beside you. He hums psalms with worrying cheer as you lurch toward the Irish shore. You arrive somewhere near the south of the island, on a rocky beach lined with driftwood and seals, who look at you with deep suspicion. The monastery isn't far, just inland, perched on a rise where wind battles with prayer, and the chapel roof sings under pressure. Ireland in 1000 AD isn't a single kingdom. It's a patchwork quilt of tuatha, small kingdoms ruled by chieftains, sometimes friendly, often less so. There's no central government, but plenty of saints, swords, and scholars. The Viking presence lingers too, especially around the coastal cities like Dublin and Waterford, which act like moody teenagers, raiders yesterday, merchants today, uncertain tomorrow. You make your way toward a monastic settlement. It's humble stone huts, shaped like beehives linked by worn paths and sheep who act like they own the place. You're welcomed with cautious warmth and strong tea that tastes like boiled moss. Inside the scriptorium, the heart of the monastery, time slows. The air smells of wax vellum and concentrated silence. Monks sit at slanted desks copying text by flickering light. Latin letters curl across calfskin pages in delicate lines, while in the margins flourishes bloom birds, beasts, and one naked man fighting a snail. You try not to stare. One monk, red-cheeked, ink-stained, and possibly sleep-deprived, shows you a page he's working on. It's an illumination of the Gospel of Matthew gilded with real gold leaf so thin it floats if you breathe wrong. God likes pretty things, he says, then sneezes violently and ruins an entire sheep's worth of parchment. He swears quietly in Latin. You ask about the strange creatures in the margins. Some are symbols, he says. Some are distractions. Some are just Tuesday. You nod as if that explains everything, which in Ireland it probably does. The monks feed you bread baked on hot stones, salted fish, and a sort of porridge that seems to double as mortar. You eat with gratitude and a spoon made from horn. During meals, they read aloud from scriptures, but one night a novice gets bored and accidentally recites a recipe for medicinal ale. The abbot sighs but lets him finish. You visit the reliquary chapel where bits of saints rest in gilded boxes. Fingers, skulls, toe bones, and in one case, a slightly suspicious feather. St. Brendan's goose, says the custodian proudly. You don't ask questions. The last person who did was sent to scrub pots for a week. You stay in a guest cell, a small stone room with a straw mattress, a single candle, and a window with no glass. The wind howls, but the stone walls hold firm. You sleep to the sound of distant chants and the quiet creak of the wooden door, which swells just slightly when the night fog rolls in. The next morning you follow a monk down a cliffside trail to a spring, said to have healing powers. It bubbles clear and cold from between two mossy rocks. Locals come to fill jugs, bathed twisted ankles, and whisper wishes. A child leaves behind a tiny carved sheep. For luck, his mother says, or penance. He bit a monk last week. Later, you visit a small village outside the monastery. Thatched cottages, chickens, peat smoke curling from low chimneys. A harpist plays by the fire. Her tune is slow, lilting, and haunting in a way that makes your bones feel like hollow reeds. She sings in Irish words, rising and falling like the land itself. You don't understand them, but the meaning wraps around your ribs and settles in your chest. Historians still argue, the abbot says one evening, whether we've preserved the light of knowledge or simply hidden it in books. He shrugs. Either way, it beats arguing with Vikings. You see that Viking shadow still lingers. At the harbor, a Norse trader sells amber silver rings and swords. He wears a cross around his neck and speaks Irish better than some monks. His children run barefoot through the shallows, laughing in two languages. As the days pass, you begin to feel the quiet rhythm of this place. Prayer wind, ink sheep song. You begin to suspect that here on this rain-slick edge of Europe, the old world and the new still shake hands in the dark. Before you leave, a monk gives you a parting gift, a tiny illuminated card with a Celtic knot drawn in red and green ink. For the journey, he says, to remember that every path loops somewhere. You take the boat back across calmer waters, holding the card in your palm as the sky clears. Ireland fades behind you, not gone, just veiled again. And as you step back onto British soil, you feel as if you've carried something with you. Not gold, not relics, not salted fish, just silence and stories. From the wet western coast of Britain, you turn your boots north. Past misty lakes and sheep-dotted valleys, you go climbing higher into the raw, wind-swept spaces where the land seems undecided between hill and mountain, and the sky's always either brooding or laughing at you. You've entered what will one day be called the Scottish Highlands, though in 1000 AD the region doesn't yet think of itself that way. You are in Alba now, a kingdom slowly, stubbornly forming from the bones of Picts Gaels and Norse tied together with alliances, grudges, and the occasional marriage forged under threat of cattle theft. Your path takes you through glens brushed with heather, where rivulets race down rock and the air smells like wet stone and smoke. You pass scattered dwellings, stone huts with turf roofs, watchful dogs and residents who eye you as if deciding whether you're friend, foe, or very lost tax inspector. You smile. That rarely helps. You share bread with a farmer who wears a woolen cloak dyed with lichen and crushed berries. His wife spins flax while his children chase a chicken with more intelligence than all of them combined. He tells you that the King Kenneth III is holding the realm together mostly, but only just, he mutters, like patching a roof with oatcakes. You stay that night in the corner of his home, curled near the fire as wind whistles down the chimney and the dog farts in its sleep. You drift off to the creaking rhythm of wood wool and worry. The next morning you climb into the hills with a hunter who offers you dried venison and advice. If you hear bagpipes at night, either follow them or run. It depends who's playing. He laughs. You don't ask for clarification. The highlands open around you like a storybook in grayscale. Great empty valleys, still locks that reflect the sky like burnished steel, pine forests that whisper, and silence profound, feral silence. You walk for hours without hearing a voice, but every so often you catch movement in the distance, a stag, a cloaked rider, or stone circle leaning ever so slightly toward the wind. You pass such a circle near dusk. Tall standing stones, some carved with spirals and animals, one cracked, clean down the middle. Your guide crosses himself. Best not to linger, he says. They say voices come out of those stones when the mist's thick. You pretend not to look back. In a village nestled near a loch, you attend a gathering around a central fire. There is storytelling, of course, always storytelling. One elder recounts a tale of giants who built the cliffs with their teeth, another of selkies who stole fishermen's hearts and then their boats. A boy recites a family saga with impressive flair, including 3 murders, 1 baking accident, and a surprisingly accurate sheep impression. A harpist plays afterward. Not the smooth melodies of a court minstrel, but a rough, resonant tune that trembles in your bones. The music feels older than Christianity, older than kings, maybe even older than hunger. The fire flickers, and for a moment you feel as if the mountains are listening. The village healer is a sharp-eyed woman who shows you her collection of mosses, dried herbs, and carved bone tools. She offers you a concoction for sleep, or perhaps visions you don't ask. She gives you a charm, a smooth stone tied with deer sinew. For protection, she says, or at least distraction. Historians still argue whether the Highland clans existed in this period as structured families or looser tribal networks, one old man says sipping ale. But that's academic. He nods toward a group of men arguing over a lost sheep. They've been shouting the same names for 3 generations. You rest the next night in a shelter dug into the hillside, your breath clouding in the lamplight, wrapped in wool soot and silence. A fox yips outside, or maybe it's something else. You decide not to find out. Further north, the Norse influence grows stronger. You meet a man who wears both a Celtic cross and a Thor's hammer around his neck. Just in case he shrugs. His wife brews mead laced with juniper berries and boasts that her great-grandfather raided Orkney and came back with a sheep that gave milk and predictions. You drink slowly. One evening you climb to the top of a windswept ridge and gaze out over a landscape painted in grays and greens, stitched together with stone fences and mists. You see no towns, no banners, just land, ancient and unconcerned with who rules it. Below you, a small herd of shaggy cattle ambles across a field. A boy leads them with a switch, singing a tune that has no words. You watch him vanish into the fog swallowed by history. Scotland in this time is a place still choosing its name. It is part fortress, part dream. Wild, poetic, political by accident, and always listening. That night, curled in a peat-warmed cottage, you dream of stags and spirals of kings and cloaks of mist of songs without melody. And when you wake, the silence is absolute. It doesn't feel empty. It feels sacred. Your descent into Wales begins with a wrong turn and an argument with the sheep. The sheep wins. Eventually, you find a track that snakes down from the highland mist into gentler, wetter valleys. You pass into a land cradled by mountains and hemmed with stone fences where the rain is a near constant presence, sometimes a misty caress, sometimes an outright slap. Wales in 1000 AD is not a single kingdom, but a proud jigsaw of petty rulers, mountain strongholds, and deep-rooted poetry. You learn quickly that here, kings are numerous, pigs are precious, and words have weight. You reach your first Welsh village nestled between 2 hills like a sigh. Smoke curls from turf-roofed houses, and the scent of leeks, peat, and stubbornness fills the air. A bard greets you before the reeve does his harp slung over his back, his words already rhyming even when they shouldn't. "You're welcome," he says, "but tread with care. The weather here has opinions." You're invited to sit near the central hearth of a chieftain's hall that evening. The fire is wide, the benches narrow, and the air thick with the scent of roast lamb and wet wool. A feast is underway to celebrate a truce, though no one seems to remember who the truce is between. The important part is that there's food, mead, and music. You try your first bowl of call, a thick stew of root vegetables, mutton, and occasional surprises. It's delicious. It also steams your eyebrows. The bard begins his performance after the 3rd round of mead. His verses unfurl like silk tales of Bronn the Blessed of dragons, in Snowdonia of brave men and clever women of lost love, and battles won by pigs. Historians still argue, he says mid-verse, whether the Battle of Minid Hygen was planned heroism or a very lucky ambush. No one minds the aside, everyone's too busy clapping. You notice a pattern here, everyone sings. Not always well, not always in tune, but always with gusto. The older the tale, the louder the chorus. The children learn early. One girl no older than 6 can recite the family's entire genealogy back to a man named Owain, who once outwitted a river spirit by yelling at it. The next day you travel by foot along a stone path that runs parallel to a brook. Hills rise like folded blankets around you. In the distance you hear the bleating of goats and faintly the sound of a quarrel over grazing rights echoing from the next valley. You reach an old hill fort that overlooks a quiet valley. Its earthworks are covered in bracken and stones peek out like worn teeth. A shepherd resting nearby tells you it was once a stronghold, then a burial ground, then a place where lovers eloped, possibly all three at once. Wales remembers, he says, even when it doesn't make sense. In a larger town, not a city, but something close, you witness a legal dispute handled by the Cyfrith. Hywel, the laws of Hywel DDA. A woman accuses her neighbor of stealing her piglet. The accused denies it. A witness is called a boy who saw nothing but claims the pig had a limp. Eventually, the matter is resolved with compensation, a measure of grain, a woven cloak, and a formal apology delivered with only minimal eye-rolling. You walk past a chapel where monks sing in Latin, and a local farmer mutters his own version under his breath, just in case. The balance between Christianity and older beliefs here is delicate. Shrines to saints sit beside sacred springs, and one woman swears her prayers work best when whispered near a hawthorn tree during rain. You're led to a holy well guarded by two geese and a carved wooden post. The water is cold clear and said to cure jealousy. A man nearby has been drinking from it for a week. His brother recently married his childhood sweetheart. You give him space. That evening you attend another gathering, this one more solemn. A poet recites an elegy for a fallen warrior. His voice shakes as he speaks of loyalty loss and the echo of names carried by the wind. No one interrupts. Even the fire seems quieter. You sleep that night in a hut near the river, lulled by the sound of water and the soft hoots of owls. The stars, when the clouds part, seem unusually close, like you could pluck them from the sky and tuck them into your satchel between your bit of cheese and your ink-stained journal. Wales, you realize, isn't defined by size or borders. It's a tapestry of song and story, pride and poetry, stone walls and soft hills. It doesn't need to be loud. It already knows who it is. You enter Brittany under a shroud of rain and folklore. It's early morning, the sky is bruised with mist, and the trees that line the road seem to lean inward as if whispering to one another about the newcomer with the muddy boots and questionable map-reading skills. This is Armorica, as it was once called, a peninsula reaching into the Atlantic, where the French language hasn't quite taken root yet, and the locals speak Breton, a cousin to Welsh and Cornish, tangled in consonants and old magic. You pass under low boughs into a forest so thick with moss and silence it might as well be dreaming. Your guide, an old man who introduces himself only as Jan, insists on speaking in riddles. The trees here listen, he says, and sometimes answer. You decide to nod and avoid eye contact with any suspiciously gnarled trunks. Brittany in 1000 AD is technically part of the Kingdom of France, but it behaves more like a separate country with better sheep and more druids. Or at least more stories about druids. The druids themselves are long gone, or so the monks claim, but the people here still murmur blessings at standing stones and leave offerings of bread and honey at forest springs. You come to a village near the Broceliande forest, where the houses are ringed with herbs and the smoke smells of peat and rosemary. A woman wearing 12 petticoats offers you a slice of quignon, so dense with butter it briefly changes your blood type. For strength, she says. You believe her. That evening, a fire is lit in the village square and the tales begin. The locals don't tell stories so much as breathe them. You hear of white stags that appear only to the lost of maidens, turned into hawks of a black dog that guards the bridge to the other world and demands a riddle in exchange for passage. One man, gripping a mug of cider like it owes him money, insists he once followed a fox deep into the forest and came out 3 days later with a pouch of silver and a limp. Historians still argue whether the Broceliande tales are late medieval inventions or remnants of older Celtic oral traditions. Someone whispers beside you. Then they add, "But it's real. I saw the stag." The next day you visit a dolmen, a stone tomb older than anyone remembers. It squats in the forest clearing like a giant's misplaced furniture. People leave ribbons and coins and bits of poetry here. You add a pebble. It feels right. Farther west, the coastline opens up with granite cliffs and pounding surf. The wind tries to carry your hat away at least 4 times. You eat oysters with a fisherman who speaks only Breton and pantomime. He draws a picture of a sea serpent in the sand, then shrugs. Maybe Tuesday. In the port town of Vannes, you watch a procession of masked dancers perform something that might be a blessing, might be a warning. The line is blurry here. A young boy explains it to you: if you dance in the wrong direction, the corn won't grow. You nod solemnly. He offers you a carved wooden charm shaped like a snail. This keeps away lightning. You buy too. The Christian monks here work hard to convert gently. Their churches are small but well kept. You visit one built on the site of a sacred spring. The priest blesses the water, but you notice someone has still left a clover crown at the base of the old stone. Just in case. You walk the coast for 2 days, passing lighthouses built of stacked stone villages with names you cannot pronounce, and cliffs where goats defy gravity. The wind carries a low moaning sound that might be seabirds or spirits or just your stomach asking for cheese. In one village, a woman teaches you how to make a protective symbol using red thread, an egg, and a feather from a black hen. For dreams, she says. And to keep out men with too many opinions. You're not sure if that's directed at you. You thank her anyway. You sleep that night in a stone hut overlooking the sea. The stars blink overhead, and the waves roll in endless rhythms below. Somewhere faintly you hear a flute, or a fox, or the wind pretending to be both. Brittany doesn't explain itself. It doesn't need to. It just is a place caught between forest and salt memory and myth. You close your eyes, wrapped in wool with a pouch of forest charms under your pillow. You dream of glowing stags, talking stones, and the strange comfort of stories older than kings. You cross the Loire River in a flat-bottomed ferry that creaks more than you'd like. The ferryman, who hums tunelessly and wears a hat made from what appears to be half a goose, says little, though he does offer you a smoked eel with the casual menace of someone who knows you'll take it. You do. It's strangely good. Your boots squelch as you arrive in Swabia. Technically part of the Holy Roman Empire, Swabia sits in what will one day become southern Germany. But in 1000 AD, it's more a cluster of towns, abbeys, farms, and loosely understood borders all humming quietly under the distant rule of the emperor and the much nearer attention of their local counts, bishops, and occasionally a very determined abbess. You begin in a town that seems to grow like moss along the side of a hill. There's no clock tower, just a bell hung from a wooden scaffold that tolls for mass mealtimes, and sometimes to alert everyone when the baker's goat escapes again. Time here is told by the sun, the bells, and an old man named Conrad who insists he knows the hour by the way. Birds sit on fence posts. You don't argue. He's right more often than not. The market bustles with early morning energy. Farmers sell root vegetables still wearing their coats of soil. A woman barters 3 eels for a wool cloak. A child offers you a pear with a bite already taken out. You accept. It's a gift after all. Swabian towns aren't grand, but they're steady. Stone churches rise modestly square and solid, built more for endurance than awe. Inside one, you hear a choir practicing voices soft and unsure, rising like mist from the damp flagstones. You sit in the back pew. A nun nods at you without stopping her song. You visit a Benedictine abbey later that day. The monks are gracious if distracted by the arrival of a new manuscript from Reichenau Abbey, a commentary on the Psalms bound in sheepskin and reverently unwrapped like holy treasure. A scribe lets you hold it. The ink is dark, the pages smell faintly of smoke, and the marginalia includes a lion that looks suspiciously like someone's cat. In the refectory, meals are taken in silence while one monk reads from a pulpit. Today's passage is from Augustine, though halfway through the monk accidentally switches to a recipe for chickpea stew. No one blinks. Either way, it's nourishing. You ask about timekeeping, and one monk gestures toward a sand glass the size of your head. We use the bell the sun and Brother Dietrich's stomach, he says. When he groans, it's nearly noon. You glance at Brother Dietrich. He is indeed groaning. In the village square, you watch a game played by children involving sticks, a hoop, and elaborate rules no adult can follow. The blacksmith swears the game was invented by his grandfather. The baker says his grandfather wrote a poem about it. They agree to disagree and exchange pickled turnips to make peace. You attend a local feast held in honor of Saint Meinrad, who is said to have converted a bear by accident. The story is unclear. The feast, however, is robust: barley porridge, spiced apples, roasted game, and a sort of flatbread that shatters when bitten. You pretend to enjoy it. Your jaw does not. As night falls, you're invited to a storytelling circle in a barn. Farmers and friars alike gather to share tales by lantern light. One tells of a mountain spirit who braids the manes of horses while they sleep. Another recounts a miracle involving a bleeding candle and a cheese wheel that spun for 3 days. Historians still argue whether that one's metaphor or indigestion, someone says. Everyone nods sagely. You sleep that night in a loft above a cooper's shop. Barrels creak below. Rain ticks against the slate roof. In the dark, you hear a pair of foxes squabbling in the alley and a man singing very softly to his chickens. The next day, you walk out along the ridgeline to visit more villages. You pass through farmsteads where women boil laundry in iron pots, where men patch roofs using bark and thatch, and where local saints are more popular than emperors. You visit a shrine to Saint Verena marked by a wooden plaque and a wreath of dried herbs. Someone's carved a poem into the post, 4 lines of love and vinegar. You meet a traveling merchant who offers you tin buttons, polished stones, and gossip from the southern towns. He claims a bishop in Constance sneezed during a sermon, and the congregation declared it an omen. Of what, you ask? He didn't say. But they're still talking about it. By late afternoon, you reach another abbey, smaller, stricter, but no less lively. The abbess here is formidable and has rewritten all the rules regarding silence and cheese rations. Equal time for God and digestion, she says firmly. You admire her leadership and her soft cheese. That evening you watch as the villagers prepare for a Kirchweih, a church consecration festival. It's more joy than solemnity. Dances break out in the square accompanied by flutes and a drum that sounds like someone hitting a table with bread. Children wear wreaths of leaves and someone dresses as Saint Ulrich and throws almonds at people. You catch one. Swabia may not glitter like Venice or echo like Paris, but it carries itself with quiet precision. Life is measured not in grand gestures, but in candles burned, bread baked, fields sown, and bells rung on time. You fall asleep to the sound of distant bells marked by nothing but rhythm and trust. No gears, no clock faces, just the shape of hours in habit and harmony. And for the first time in a while, time doesn't feel like something to chase. It feels like something to keep. Eastward now into the forested valleys and dusty roads of Bohemia, where the hills begin to rise again and the shadows grow longer, as if the land itself remembers old kingdoms and older wounds. The air changes cooler, drier, carrying the scent of birch bark and beer foam. Bohemia in 1000 AD is a principality with sharp elbows and a talent for survival. Ruled by the Przemyslid dynasty, it plays the political game between the Holy Roman Empire and its Slavic neighbors with the sly patience of a fox pretending to be a cat. The people here build with stone and stories, and neither crumbles easily. You arrive first in a mining village nestled between dark pines and darker hills. Smoke coils from chimneys. Miners emerge from the earth like moles wearing leather caps, their faces smudged with silver dust and vague suspicion. One offers you a chunk of ore and says it sings on lucky nights. You nod respectfully and pocket it just in case. In the village chapel, you see iron crosses and candle stubs melted to the shape of questions. A boy recites prayers in both Latin and Old Czech, unsure which will work faster. Covering my bases, he mutters. You pass on to Prague, still more fortress than city. It sprawls across hills and huddles close to the Vltava River. Its stone bridges not yet famous, but its towers already ambitious. Prague Castle crowns the highest rise, its ramparts under construction. Its guards sleepy but decorative. You're ushered into a square where a small market trades in wool, garlic, wooden toys, and beer that has the audacity to sparkle in the sun. A monk sells indulgences beside a man selling sausages. You suspect they know each other. A local offers to show you the bone church. You accept. You shouldn't have. Sedlec Ossuary lies just outside town, and its interior is how to put this memorable. Bones, everywhere. Skulls stacked into pyramids. Femurs forming chandeliers. A coat of arms made entirely from vertebrae and pelvic bones. You stand in silence as your guide hums a hymn and says, "Well, at least no one gets forgotten." He hands you a pamphlet drawn by a very optimistic monk. You pretend to admire the penmanship. Despite or because of its skeletal decor, Sedlec is peaceful. Death here is not grim. It's orderly, decorative, and oddly reverent. The ossuary accepts mortality not with fear, but with design flair. You return to Prague and find a tavern beside the old city gate. The ceilings are low, the floor uneven, and the beer flows like a small river. You're served stew thick with barley mushrooms and something described as forest meat. You choose not to ask. It's delicious. The tavern crowd is lively miners, monks, merchants, and one man who insists he's descended from a forest spirit and proves it by juggling apples. Badly. Laughter fills the room. You learn a local proverb. A thief is best caught with cheese, a ghost with honey. You pretend to understand. The next morning you climb to a small hermitage overlooking the river. The view is wide and green with fog curling like sleep across the hills. A hermit monk invites you for tea and tells you the story of St. Wenceslas, not the Carol the Man. He ruled just a few decades ago and was murdered by his brother at church. Family, the hermit says, sipping from a chipped cup. Always complicated. Historians still argue he continues whether Wenceslas was a saint by politics or by piety. He stares at a passing crow. But his statue hasn't fallen. That's enough. You visit a monastery library where scribes are copying the Psalms onto pages made of sheep, illuminated with colors that look plucked from a rainbow's memory. One monk shows you a page where the Virgin Mary is taller than a castle and holding a rose the size of a bishop. Proportion is poetic, he says. You agree, not entirely sure what that means. Outside the streets whine without logic. You pass weavers, butchers, midwives, and blacksmiths, all working within the same stone courtyard. A child carries a loaf of bread larger than her torso. A man plays a stringed instrument badly but with feeling. By twilight, the city turns amber. The towers cast long shadows, and the bells from half a dozen chapels ring slightly out of sync, like drunken cousins arguing about supper. You wander to the riverside where lovers whisper and merchants haggle over boatloads of salt wool and rumors. Bohemia holds itself proudly. It's not trying to be Rome or Aachen. It doesn't chase emperors. It waits sharp-eyed and quiet, sure that the world will come to it eventually. That night, you sleep in a loft above a candlemaker's shop. The whole building smells of beeswax and warm wood. A mouse watches you from the windowsill. You offer it a crumb and wish it well. You dream of silver veins running through stone of skeletons, dancing politely, and of a city that breathes history through candlelight and barley beer. The road to Krakow is long and lined with dust cart tracks, and the occasional traveler with the look of someone trying not to get robbed or involved. You pass fields of rye and barley forest filled with bees and roadside shrines to saints you've never heard of, each with flowers, bones, or a sad little candle fighting the wind. Krakow in 1000 AD is a rising city, not yet the glittering jewel of the Polish crown, but already a crossroads of trade culture and very heated theological arguments. The Piast rulers are carving out their realm with a mixture of diplomacy and inherited luck. Bolesław I, called the Brave, is on the throne, and the bishops here have just gotten a shiny new archdiocese courtesy of the Pope. There are celebrations, but also paperwork. You enter the city through a wooden palisade gate guarded by two very bored-looking men. One eyes your boots, the other eyes your satchel. Neither seems particularly interested in stopping you. A goat walks through beside you. No one questions it. The streets are busy with merchants shouting prices, dogs barking over sausages, and the clang of hammers from blacksmiths. With no patience for nuance, the architecture is sturdy timber and stone, but the market square is already becoming something of a hub, full of cloth honey-salted fish and pots shaped like saints. One pot has a face you could swear is watching you. You stop at a tavern nestled in a low arch of stone. Inside, the air is rich with wood-smoked garlic and fermented cabbage. You order something called barszcz beetroot soup, served so hot it scalds your resolve. A woman at the next table offers you horseradish and bread. You accept. Then she asks your opinion on whether relics from a saint who died in Moravia should really be housed in Krakow. You choke on a beet. Everyone here seems to have strong opinions. Scholars, merchants, even the stable boy outside the church has a take on Slavic liturgical rites. Historians still argue. A young scribe tells you later whether Poland was truly Christianized by 1000 AD, or if most villagers just learned to say amen before butchering a goat. You sip your ale and nod. He hasn't blinked in 5 minutes. You visit Wawel Hill, the city's elevated heart, where Krakow's early cathedral is rising in cautious layers. It's modest for now, but the foundations speak of ambition. A priest in black robes shows you the relic of Saint Florian, just a finger bone, but it's enough to stir both faith and fundraising. Inside the church, a young monk sings psalms while mopping the floor. He does both with equal enthusiasm, though not equal skill. The stained glass glows with the afternoon sun, and you feel that rare stillness when a place becomes more than stone. Later in the artisan quarter, you meet a man carving wooden figurines of animal saints, and one item he calls the argument duck. It has two heads, both angry. He says it sells well to newlyweds. You buy one. In a smoky hall that night, you sit beside a nobleman with a thick mustache and very thin patience. He drinks mead from a horn, boasts about a hunting trip where he may or may not have challenged a bear to single combat, and complains that the Germans are too orderly. His wife rolls her eyes. She knits with the speed of war. A performer begins to recite a Bogorodzica, an early hymn in the Polish language. Everyone quiets. Even the bear man stops drinking. The words are slow, rhythmic, sacred. You don't understand every word, but the feeling is unmistakable. This is a country beginning to know itself. You sleep above a candle seller's stall. The floor is uneven, the bed is hay, and the room smells sweet and smoky. Outside, the city murmurs distant wheels, hooves a lullaby in a language with soft edges and sharp consonants. In the morning, you walk the streets as the vendors set up shop, sweeping last night's ash from doorways. A priest blesses a wheel of cheese. A child throws crumbs to birds that may or may not be demons. The sun slips over the rooftops like a lazy blessing. A baker gives you a hot Aborzanek, a twisted bread ring sprinkled with salt. He says it's good luck for travelers. You believe him. Krakow is young but not uncertain. It is stitching together threads of east and west, of old gods and new, of scholars and storytellers, and women who throw beet soup like war paint. It is still raw, still trying, but its voice is clear even when hoarse from arguing. You leave with the taste of salt and beets on your lips and a new understanding cities are not made from stone but from voices. And Krakow even now is loud with hope. You continue your eastward drift, skirting the thick forests and quiet rivers of Poland until the world begins to feel different. The road thins, the language shifts. Churches grow fewer and the trees start looking at you funny. You've arrived in the lands of the Baltic tribes. It's 1000 AD, and these are not yet the countries you'll know later as Lithuania, Latvia, or Estonia. These are the lands of the Prussians, the Curonians, the Samogitians names that echo like ancient drums across swamp and fir tree. It's a wild place. Not uncivilized, just uncaptured, still defiantly pagan, and in no mood for your opinions on bishops. Your first encounter is with a merchant caravan nervously rolling through the woods. The men carry knives and crosses in equal measure. They tell you about a village nearby that's accepted baptism, sort of. You follow them, unsure whether to whisper or whistle. The village is built in a clearing, its houses rounded like overturned bowls, smoke threading lazily from their thatched tops. You arrive just in time to see a baptism in progress. A missionary priest is ankle deep in a wooden tub, trying to keep hold of a very unimpressed young man who smells like fish and destiny. The man is dunked blessed and offered a small cross. He accepts it, then immediately asks if he can still sacrifice a goat on Wednesdays only. The priest hesitates. No, he says eventually. The young man nods, pockets the cross, and mutters something about hedging bets. The people here are practical. They know the missionaries bring gifts, protection, and the ever-useful ability to read Latin. But they also know the old gods still linger in stones, trees, and storm clouds. You're invited to a feast that evening in a longhouse draped with bearskins and birch torches. Boiled grains, dried fish, and fermented berry drink are served in generous quantities. A girl plays a pipe carved from elder wood, and everyone claps though no one's in rhythm. Later, a shaman, tall, silent, wearing bones and moss, sprinkles ashes over the fire and tells a story in a voice that sounds like bark peeling from a tree. You don't catch every word, but it seems to involve a god who turned into a stag to escape a jealous thunder spirit, only to fall in love with a river. Historians still argue whether these myths are remnants of a unified Baltic religion or just campfire entertainment gone wildly out of control, someone near you whispers. You believe both. You spend the night in a timber hut with no chimney. The smoke curls into the rafters like a sleepy ghost. You dream of trees with teeth and rivers that sing. The next morning you travel to another village, this one more exposed, closer to the coast. Here you see the unmistakable influence of Norse traders. A man in a fur cloak shows you an axe he got in a trade deal with Danes. He's very proud. It is admittedly extremely shiny. Christian influence is creeping in here too. One hut has both a crucifix and a sun symbol carved into its doorframe. You ask the woman inside what she believes in. She shrugs. The one that keeps the chickens from disappearing. You visit a holy site deep in the woods, a sacred oak grove, where offerings of bread coins and feathers lie beneath the trees. No churches here, just quiet, deep stillness. A boy points to one particularly large oak and says it hasn't dropped a leaf in 7 years. You stare at it until your neck aches. It does look smug. That evening, you meet another missionary, this one German, and very tired. He's been here a year and baptized 6 people, 2 of them twice. He says the real battle isn't spiritual, it's cultural. They'll take the cross, he mutters, but try to convince them not to eat pine cone paste during Lent. You share bread with a blacksmith who forges knives, arrowheads, and according to him, truth. He tells you about a warrior who rode through 3 villages yelling at the rain until it stopped. We still talk about him, he says, mostly as a warning. The tribal structure is loose here. Power is held by those who earn it. Warriors, seers, elders, or anyone who owns a boat with more than one sail. There's no duke, no castle, no written law. Just custom memory and a very sharp understanding of who has the nicest goats. As you prepare to leave, someone hands you a small amulet, a spiral carved into a black stone. For balance, they say. For crossroads. You hang it from your belt and feel suddenly like a participant in something older than maps. You exit through a marshy trail boot sucking at the mud, twilight falling in copper bands across the reeds. The wind carries smoke from a distant fire and the soft echo of drumming. The Baltic tribes have not been conquered. Not yet. They are watching, waiting, chanting to the trees and smiling politely at the missionaries while burying offerings under the hearth. And somehow you know they'll outlast more than just the century. You follow the merchant trail southeast, winding through forests that grow denser, villages that grow richer, and streets that shine quite literally with marble and gilded stone. The dirt gives way to mosaic, and suddenly, after months of wood smoke, root vegetables, and theological guesswork, you arrive at the eastern jewel of the old empire, Constantinople. It's 1000 AD, and the Byzantine capital is already ancient. Older than Paris, older than London, older than most countries, it sprawls across the Bosphorus like a woman reclining in silk and armor. The walls are massive, tiered, triple-layered. One set for invaders, one for earthquakes, and one probably for pride. You pass through the gates with a crowd of traders, pilgrims, beggars, and at least one man carrying a goose like a briefcase. Immediately, the air changes. It smells like spices you can't name, incense you can't ignore, and money. Everything smells faintly of money. You're overwhelmed in minutes. There are churches the size of hills, baths larger than entire villages, roads paved with stones that sparkle in the sun. Men in togas argue about taxes while eunuchs in gold-threaded robes whisper through doorways. Peacocks strut in courtyards. Cats outnumber people. Every third person seems to be quoting Aristotle very loudly. You find yourself at the heart of it all, the Hagia Sophia. A structure so immense and luminous it feels like a dream built in marble. You step inside and stop breathing for a moment. Light filters through high windows like mist through a sieve. The gold mosaics shimmer even in shadow, and the dome hangs above you like a second sky. A priest chants in Greek from the pulpit. His voice vibrates in the bones of the building. Candles flicker, their flames mirrored in marble floors, polished by centuries of barefoot pilgrims. You see crosses, stars, angels, and the occasional imperial eagle glaring down from the arches. A guide approaches you, an older man with impeccable posture and a nose that could command legions. He tells you the building was designed by mathematicians, not architects. God's house, he says, should be measured with reason. He then coughs discreetly and asks for a small donation. You exit to the streets, dazed. A man sells pistachio sweets beside a scholar selling hand-copied scrolls of Homer. A woman offers you rosewater to wash your hands and then tries to sell you 7 jars of it. You buy one mostly out of fear. You walk past the Hippodrome, once the site of grand chariot races, now a public space, with obelisks, statues, and a permanent smell of sweat and history. Nearby, a group of children play a game involving stick string and extremely specific rules involving the Emperor Basil Sue. No one questions it. You find an inn by the sea walls. The owner greets you with a bow and a lecture on Byzantine table manners. No slouching, he warns, and don't argue theology before dessert. Duly noted, dinner is a revelation. Spiced lamb figs soaked in honey flatbread, brushed with olive oil and sesame and a thick, tangy yogurt, served with mint and something pink you can't identify but decide to love. A fellow guest, a court scribe, perhaps tells you a story about a general who once won a battle with just 3 men and a sack of geese. You laugh. He doesn't. Later, you're invited to a bathhouse. You hesitate. He insists. It's cleaner than anything you've seen in a year. Marble benches, mosaic floors, and steam rooms that smell like citrus and eucalyptus. You lie back and watch the ceiling vanish in mist, wondering why everyone else in Europe seems content with cold buckets and damp regrets. Historians still argue your bath companion says whether Byzantium was more Roman or Greek, more Christian or imperial, he shrugs. We say all of the above. You walk the streets at night and the city glows. Lanterns burn from windows. Processions move through the shadows, chanting in Greek and swinging incense. You hear whispers of palace intrigue, heresies, naval victories, and rising taxes. The city doesn't sleep, it purrs. In the square, a puppet show reenacts the Council of Chalcedon. It's surprisingly engaging. One puppet is clearly modeled after the patriarch. The audience throws olives when he misquotes scripture. You return to your room and collapse into silken bedding. The pillow smells of lavender. Outside your window, the sea hums against the walls. In the distance, you hear church bells and the soft tapping of sandals on marble. Constantinople is not like the rest of Europe. It doesn't pretend to be. It wears its age like a crown. It speaks in tongues and dreams in gold. And, though its empire may be shrinking, its shadow stretches across the continent, reminding every backwater bishop and goat cheese baron who once ruled the world. You fall asleep drunk on incense and moonlight and dream of domes, peacocks, and libraries that never burn. Leaving Constantinople feels like stepping out of a painting. The streets become dustier, the roofs less gilded, the air more honest. You travel west by sea, just a short hop, really, and soon find yourself on a Greek island, so sun-drenched and slow-moving it feels like time stopped here on purpose. The island doesn't have a name anyone agrees on. Some call it Patmos. Others insist it's Naxos. One local refers to it simply as the place with too many goats and not enough figs. You decide it doesn't matter. What does matter is that you've landed somewhere sacred, stubborn, and not quite ready to be modern. It's 1000 AD in the Byzantine Aegean, and these islands are dotted with tiny chapels, olive groves, and the occasional pirate. The people here live by the sun, the sea, and a book of saints so thick it doubles as a pillow. You disembark to the sound of gulls' goat bells and an argument between 2 men about whether St. George ever visited the island. He didn't need to, one yells, his horse did. You walk the narrow, whitewashed paths between houses built like cubes, their shutters painted blue, their doorways shaded with grapevines. The light is sharp here. Everything feels outlined in clarity. Every stone, every fig tree, every worry. You pass a small chapel tucked into a cliffside. Inside, candles flicker in shallow niches. Icons of the Virgin and St. Nicholas stare down with worn compassion. A woman sits near the front, whispering a litany that sounds half like a prayer, half like a shopping list. You sit quietly, and she hands you a fig wrapped in a fig leaf. No explanation. It's the best fig you've ever eaten. The priest here is both ancient and enthusiastic. He invites you into his garden, which contains 5 chickens, 2 cats, and 1 shrine built out of an old olive press. Miracles happen, he says. Sometimes they're just small. He shows you a scroll written in Greek. It's a collection of local miracle tales. One involves a ship caught in a storm that was saved by a statue of St. John, blinking at the right moment. Another claims a donkey refused to walk until its owner confessed to stealing walnuts. Historians still argue whether these are divine signs or convenient storytelling, he says with a wink. You spend your days wandering the island's hills where thyme and sage grow wild, and the cicadas sing like broken harps. Shepherds guide flocks along cliff paths, pausing to wave or offer you cheese so strong it gives unsolicited advice. The sea glimmers below like a god lounging in sapphire. One afternoon you join a family for lunch in a courtyard shaded by fig trees. The food is simple and perfect olives bread, wine fish cooked in lemon and herbs. Conversation flows easily even though you only understand every third word. A boy recites a poem about Saint Irene and a miracle involving bees. A grandmother tells him to hush and eat. Later at the monastery perched high on a rocky crag, you meet a scribe copying passages from the Gospel of Matthew in a script so tidy it makes your head hurt. He pauses to ask if you've heard the local tale of the flying monk. He didn't fly far, he admits, but he tried. You ask if that counts as a miracle. Only if you land gracefully, he replies. You visit a sacred spring hidden in a cave. The water is cold, clear, and tastes like promises. Someone's left flowers beside it, wild daisies and sprigs of rosemary. The walls are covered in carved crosses, initials, and faint outlines of fish. One evening, the villagers gather in the main square for music and dancing. A woman plays a lyre, its notes lilting like laughter. Young people dance in a circle while elders sit on stone benches sipping wine and remembering when they danced like that. You're handed a tambourine. You shake it once and are politely told to just clap instead. As the night deepens, the talk turns as it always does to saints and storms. One man swears St. Basil appeared to him in a dream and told him to plant fig trees. I planted 12, he says. Only one survived, but it's a very holy fig. You sleep under a roof of reeds, the sea murmuring nearby. A cat curls at your feet. The stars blink overhead, thick and lazy. Everything is quiet except the faint hum of distant waves and the soft creak of old wood dreaming of galleys and saints. Here miracles are small, personal, and often edible. A goat that returns home unasked. A prayer that stops the rain just long enough for the laundry to dry. A fish that jumps into the boat seemingly on purpose. You leave the island reluctantly boarding a boat crewed by men who speak 6 languages and trust none of them. The priest blesses you with a sprig of basil. A child throws a pebble into your pocket for safety. You accept both. And as the island fades into the blue, you realize that sometimes holiness doesn't require a cathedral. Just a fig tree, a spring, and a sky wide enough to whisper into. The Pyrenees rise in slow blue-gray folds as you press westward once more, drawn toward the borderlands where mountains serve as both walls and windows. You're entering the final stretch now into the realm of Al-Andalus, where the rules are different. The light is golden and the air smells perpetually of orange blossom ink and roasted almonds. You follow a well-traveled road down into Cordoba, a city that glows like a polished coin in the warm Andalusian sun. Even from afar, you can see the domes and courtyards. You hear the water trickling through fountains and the distant clatter of sandals over marble floors. You smell cinnamon, cumin, and rosewater drifting on the breeze. In 1000 AD, Cordoba is the jewel of Islamic Spain. It's a city of unmatched libraries, tiled courtyards, poets, astronomers, philosophers, and most importantly, plumbing. After weeks of wooden huts and smoke-filled chapels, it feels like stepping into a dream with running water and citrus trees. The streets are narrow and shaded, lined with whitewashed buildings that press close together their upper floors, leaning toward each other like gossiping sisters. Vines spill from balconies. Cats nap on carved lintels. The people here walk with purpose but never rush. Their robes are loose, their words are soft, their knowledge is immense. You're welcomed into a fondak, a guest house for travelers, by a man named Ismail, who immediately offers you tea sweetened with mint and a sticky date pastry that defies gravity. "You've come at the right time," he says. The moon is full, the libraries are open, and the baklava is fresh. The Great Mosque. La Mezquita dominates the city like a quiet thunderclap. Its forest of red and white arches stretches into shadow, a space designed not to impress but to awe. You walk its polished floors in silence, catching whispers of Arabic prayers, echoes of Christian hymns, and the sigh of air moving through cool stone. A scholar there tells you the mosque has over 1,000 columns. "We stopped counting," he says, "because counting is for men who doubt." You smile. You doubt a lot. You're invited to an evening gathering at a majlis, a kind of salon for minds. Under the stars, in a tiled courtyard scented with jasmine and night-blooming herbs, people discuss geometry, poetry, the motion of the stars, the translation of Galen, and whether or not you can trust a goat's memory. The verdict is split. A woman recites verses in Arabic that make the moon feel like a jealous coin. A young boy recites a list of herbs and their properties from memory. A blind man quotes Plato, then follows it up with a joke about wine. Everyone claps. You feel both unworthy and strangely comforted. Historians still argue, someone says, whether the greatness of Al-Andalus came from tolerance or tension. A man playing a lute murmurs, "Greatness doesn't ask permission." He plucks a note that lingers like perfume. You visit the library, one of dozens. Not just shelves, but vaults. Manuscripts in Arabic, Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. Books on medicine, music, botany, law, astrology. You see one scribe carefully transcribing Aristotle with a brush so fine it could write on a grapeseed. He hasn't spoken in 2 days. "Focus," he whispers, eyes never leaving the page. You take a bath at a public hammam. First the warm room, then the hot room, then the cold plunge that briefly separates your soul from your body. You emerge cleaner than you've ever been, wrapped in linen, and offered a slice of orange and a spoonful of pomegranate seeds. You're not sure if you're still alive, but you're very polite about it. Food is everywhere: stuffed eggplants, chickpeas with herbs lamb, slow cooked until it forgets it was once alive. You try a dish with honey and cinnamon that makes you question your loyalty to turnips. People laugh easily here. They argue fiercely but kindly. Even the cats seem better educated. One day you watch a group of children learning both Arabic calligraphy and Latin declensions in the same lesson. The teacher uses a stick to point but never to strike. He says the hand must learn to write before it learns to wield. You write that down immediately. There's music in the streets, flutes, drums, and the occasional oud played so skillfully it sounds like silk unwinding. You pass a shop selling instruments, another selling perfumes, and one that claims to sell nothing but the dreams of tanners. You decide not to ask. On your last night in Cordoba, you walk the bridge over the Guadalquivir River. The moon casts everything in silver. You hear the call to prayer echoing from one tower and church bells answering from another. You feel a moment of perfect balance between faith's languages worlds. You sit beneath an orange tree. The fruit hangs low, fragrant, and slightly bitter. A passing old man says, "To taste sweetness, you must also know rind." You don't know if he's a philosopher or just very into citrus. It doesn't matter. Cordoba isn't just a city, it's an idea, not just of what civilization can build, but of what it can imagine. You fall asleep on a rooftop, stars above, mosaics below, and 1,000 books dreaming in the dark. The path home isn't a straight one. You leave Cordoba before sunrise, slipping through the city's sleeping streets, past shuttered stalls and moonlit courtyards across the ancient bridge, where the river glows pale and still. West and then north, you go climbing slowly into the Pyrenees, those stubborn, jagged elders that separate the Iberian world from the rest of Europe, like a raised eyebrow from a wise old man. It is not an easy climb. The air thins. The trees huddle low to the ground. Your boots slide on gravel. You pause often, partly to breathe, partly to admire how far you've come. You pass a group of pilgrims descending their cloaks, torn their feet wrapped in rags, their faces radiant. One sings a hymn in a language you don't recognize, and another hands you a piece of bread that tastes like it was blessed 3 times and forgotten twice. North is simpler, one says, harder but simpler. You stop to drink from a stream so clear it feels like memory. The sky expands above you into a pale, aching blue. Below, valleys unfold like old parchment. Farms, roads, spires, and stone cottages scatter across the land like chess pieces between games. You reach a high pass where a stone marker stands. No name. Just a cross carved into the rock, and a pile of tokens left behind bits of cloth bread coins and one well-worn shoe. You add a small charm from Brittany, then sit beside it in the wind. This is where the journey begins to fold inward. Down the other side you go through switchbacks and pine forests, past shrines to saints you've met in tavern stories and relics you've touched with skeptical fingers. A falcon circles above you. You take it as a sign of what you're not sure, but it feels like punctuation. You pass shepherds in wool cloaks who speak only with gestures. One points to the sky and mimics a dragon. You don't ask, you simply smile and nod. Dragons feel reasonable now. At a monastery built into a cliff, you stay the night with monks who sing in 5 tones and serve soup so hot it evaporates questions. One monk offers you a scroll of copied Virgil, another hands you a fig and tells you to read it slowly. Either way, he says you'll be nourished. You keep walking, down through green valleys that begin to feel familiar. Through forests where children run barefoot beside streams, and old women press herbs into your hands without explanation. In one village, you're mistaken for a saint, and then just as quickly for a tax collector. You deny both gratefully. You cross through farms where roosters announce your arrival. Through towns where the bread is crustier, the cheese smellier, and the gossip more enthusiastic. You hear your name once spoken by a child, but decide not to ask how they know it. Back near the Alps, the cycle begins to close. The air is thin again. Goats peer at you with ancient judgment. Smoke drifts from the same wooden roofs you passed under months ago. You arrive at the little hut where it all began. Wool blanket, smoky hearth cheese for breakfast. You sit at the table and unwrap a piece of bread, saved from Krakow, a fig from the Aegean, and a coin from Constantinople. They don't belong together, but somehow they do. As the wind brushes the window shutters and the last embers in the hearth pulse with sleepy heat, you lie back and let your eyelids fall. You've traveled the world of 1000 AD. Not all of it, but enough to hear it breathe. and it breathed in chants in markets and stew pots and bone churches and bathhouses and forests that whispered names no one has written down. You met saints and sheep and possibly a witch disguised as a baker. You saw cities dream. You saw villages remember. You saw people live argue, bless, and feed each other. And you didn't just witness history. You walked inside it. The fires burned low now. The world outside the hut has faded into soft snow or soft grass you choose. You lie beneath that woolen blanket again, the one that smells faintly of goat's time, and every stop you've made along the way. The wind moves gently through cracks in the timber. Not cold now, just present like a lullaby hummed through keyholes. Everything has slowed. The bells in the cities have quieted. The quills in the scriptoria rest. The towers of Constantinople gleam softly behind your eyes, and the fig trees still rustle even in dreams. Your boots are off. Your pack is set aside. You have nothing more to carry. Let the road unspool behind you like a ribbon, each step a word, and a very long, very beautiful sentence. And let that sentence come to rest now. No punctuation needed. There's only stillness and warmth and memory. I'll be here with another story for you tomorrow night.